Today on Eye on Northwest Politics, 16 days. That's when Oregonians decide their next governor. As the state deals with a persistent homeless crisis and record gun violence, the three candidates, Democrat Tina Kotek, Republican Christine Drazan, and unaffiliated candidate Betsy Johnson, are battling for the governor's seat. This is the last in our series of governor's race editions of Eye on Northwest Politics, where I sit down with each candidate one-on-one. And this week, the candidate vying to be the first Republican to lead Oregon since 1987, Christine Drazan. Eye on Northwest Politics starts now. Thanks for joining us. This is Eye on Northwest Politics. I'm Ken Boddie. If you follow the polls, you know that Christine Drazan could become Oregon's first Republican governor since Vic Atiyeh in the 1980s. The former House Minority Leader from Canby is riding a wave of voter discontent, especially regarding homelessness and crime. And the three-way race for Oregon governor is changing the traditional political dynamic this time around. Here to talk those issues and more is Republican candidate for governor Christine Drazan. Welcome to Eye on Northwest Politics. Well, you were first elected to the state legislature in 2018. You quickly became caucus leader. Now you've got a real shot to become governor in a blue state. What does that say to you about where Oregon is right now?
It really does show that Oregonians themselves are looking around and they recognize that the direction of our state is not helping their families. It's not helping their businesses, and they are open to change. And for me, I ran for office in the first place to make a difference, to serve my community. And the opportunity to do that was, in fact, limited by this heavy-handed single-party control that I experienced when I went into the legislature. Now, running for governor is an opportunity to be more effective and make greater changes on behalf of Oregonians themselves. And I'm just so thrilled to have the opportunity to go to Oregon voters and say, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And if you're not, then we need change.
Biggest issue that Oregonians say we're facing right now, the homeless issue.
Yes.
It's not just in the city of Portland. There are many communities around the state of Oregon that are dealing with this. So what is your strategy to deal with homelessness and affordable housing?
Yeah, I had a homelessness roundtable in Bend earlier this week, and they had the same kinds of conversations in Bend that I'm hearing in Portland and LeGrand and Medford, all over the state. People are saying they're doing everything they can locally to resolve the challenge, and it's too big for them. And so my response to homelessness has been to say, as governor, I will declare a homelessness state of emergency. It does a few things. It's not just simply a question of whether or not you can supersede land use laws to cite a homeless village. It really is about taking all of the resources that are available at the state level and aligning them in a more holistic way to support the populations that are on the street. But first, we have to know who's out there. We have to better understand what their needs are. We have to do assessments. And I believe that with the state taking a leading role, that it will support local governments. Like the Veterans Village in Bend, for example, really was a local initiative. They said, we believe that we can solve homelessness for veterans, and the community rallied. But what remains for them, what is left for them, is the larger challenge. I mean, they have thousands of individuals in Central Oregon whose needs aren't being met by the Veterans Village. They're doing everything they can. They need the state's leadership. They need the state's help. The homelessness state of emergency allows me to set aside rules and regulations and, in fact, direct agencies to make addressing this challenge a priority.
Housing affordability may be the main issue regarding homelessness, but a lot of people who are out on the streets, and we see this in Portland, they have other issues that they're dealing with as well. I mean, there might be mental illness, there might be some mental health issues, there may be drug addiction issues that are contributing to their situation. How can the state act as a coordinator of the resources that these people need, in addition to housing?
Yeah, I actually believe that the state's role here is substantial. When it comes to serving the needs of folks that are facing behavioral health challenges, mental health challenges, the state needs to support that workforce. We need to get more people into those fields. We need to improve reimbursement rates so people choose those fields and then they can sustain their businesses to provide those supports. But in addition to that, we have a real challenge right now. I mean, we know that the majority of people that are houseless, living on our streets, unsheltered, in fact, do have challenges with addiction. And no matter what got you to that point where you're living unsheltered, to be able to navigate that, to be able to live through that experience, a lot of people are self-medicating at this point. We have got to recognize that this isn't just as simple as giving someone a key to a tiny house and hoping for the best, but that the trauma and the experience of living in that way is going to require supports, and the state is the right one to provide that support. It's all local governments, our mental and behavioral health system is a statewide system. Our counties are kind of rubber meets the road on the ground for those issues, but the state needs to do more to support those efforts.
You've said in the past that one of the first things you would do is fire Governor Brown's agency directors. If elected, would you still do that, and why?
Yeah, and we've had 40 years, as you mentioned in the intro, of single parties that have been appointing these agency heads. I believe really strongly that Oregonians who choose change in November, what they want is real change. And that means, in particular, the bureaucracy in Oregon has been incompetent. We're talking about agencies whose core function is to get out unemployment checks, or in fact to provide rent assistance, or help our kids learn in schools. And time and again, our leadership at the agency level has failed in those core functions. And as governor, I will demand high expectations, customer service-oriented focus, and a laser focus on meeting the core mission of that agency. And that hasn't been the case. The leadership that we've had in Salem has allowed, frankly, the critical functions of government that provide our social safety net have not been there when Oregonians have needed them. We cannot allow them to continue in these roles. We need a fresh start. We need leaders that are committed to actually doing their jobs. The only way to do that is to have that conversation with the agency heads and say, I need your resignation.
Any agencies that you would target first?
Well, we cannot continue with the Oregon Health Authority under the leadership it's under right now. So certainly the Oregon Health Authority is one that has to be replaced. Oregon Department of Education, continue to listen to Colt Gill in particular, talk about our schools, and I could not be less impressed with his lack of focus on outcomes for students, his lack of focus on helping students achieve and get to those benchmarks. All of our kids should be reading by third grade. I know that we have an approach to our students. We need to support all of their needs. We certainly need to provide care and an affirming environment in our schools for all students. And also the goal of school, the purpose of school is to teach our kids, to teach them really, truly how to think, not what to think. And for too long inside our schools under Colt Gill's leadership, that has not been the case. And we need to get back to the basics. We need to restore graduation requirements. We need to improve graduation rates. I don't believe that we can do that under Colt Gill's leadership.
In 2020, you led a walkout of Republicans in the state legislature to oppose the Democrats' cap and trade climate bill. It stalled the legislature because of lack of quorum. It also killed dozens of other bills as well that were in the pipeline. That leads to our first viewer question. This is from Larry Ramey of Salem. As a lawmaker, you have blocked all you could. What would changing the party in control fix?
Yeah, so this is an important question. There is this balance of power that must happen in our civic life. When Democrats wanted to align Oregon with California's program for cap and trade, they knew, based on public testimony, they knew, based on testimony from the experts, that that was going to increase the cost of gas $3 a gallon. I can't even imagine. It was going to increase the cost to heat your home by 30% or more at the start of that program. We don't need California's rolling blackouts in Oregon. The intent to, in fact, tell Democrats we want this sent out to Oregon voters was my job and my responsibility to stand up for the people that weren't being heard in that process, to stand up for Oregonians that could not afford that proposal. Now, we talk a lot about what happened after the walkout, and I think it's really important to know that what actually happened is that Democrats killed those bills. We came back into Salem with more than enough time left in that legislative session. It's a constitutionally mandated maximum amount of time we could have been there to have addressed all of that legislation. Instead, Tina Kotek and Peter Courtney made the decision to close session early, effectively killing any possibility of moving anything. They basically said to Oregonians, if we can't have cap and trade, you don't get anything. That is, in fact, not our responsibility. That was their choice and their decision. I believe it was the wrong decision. But they put cap and trade ahead of everything else we could have done to close out that session.
What do you think of Measure 113, which Oregonians will be voting on now? And that would prevent lawmakers from using unexcused absences. It would keep them from being reelected. What do you think of that?
I believe that we have elections for a reason, and Oregon voters themselves should be the ones to decide who represents them in Salem. And quorum is built into our system as checks and balances on supermajority power. I think it is, in fact, the worst case scenario. Considering that means everything else is broken down. Considering that means that you have no voice. Not that you're balancing things, not that you're making modest concessions, but that you, in fact, have been shut out of the process to the point that's all that's left, and everything's broken down at that point. I believe that the quorum requirement in our Constitution is there for a reason. It's there to defend the voices of the minority party and to hold supermajorities to account. I think it should be rare, but I do not think it should be cause for someone not to be able to stand for election. I went back after we had denied quorum, and I stood in front of my voters in my own district, and I said, I'm going to be accountable for the decision I just made. I'm going to tell you guys why, and it's up to you whether or not you believe that I should, in fact, represent you again. I think that's the way to do this. My constituents in my own community are the ones that I was in Salem to serve and represent. They should be the ones to decide whether or not my actions and my votes on their behalf serve them well.
The Oregon legislature is solidly in the hands of Democrats, although this election could narrow the gap in the Senate. This question comes from Richard Hartman of Portland. How will you be able to advance your agenda if the legislature is in Democratic hands?
Yeah, I think this is one of the best things for Oregonians, is this idea that we could have a split legislature and governor's office. For years, we had John Kitzhaber in the center office, a Democrat, and we had Republican control of the House and the Senate. We found during that time that we had checks and balances in our state during those years. And the Republicans and the Democrats were required to work together. They were required to come to compromise and negotiate in a way that created durable solutions long-term for Oregonians. That is a benefit. It's positive for Oregonians. You cannot move a bill through the legislative process. You can't have a balanced budget without the signature of the governor. And so I will use that opportunity to be able to draw people to the table and to bring people together to bridge that rural-urban divide, to bridge the rural-Democrat divide, and to have a more unified Oregon. I'm running for governor to serve all Oregonians, regardless of party affiliation. This is about improving quality of life for all Oregonians. It's not about a political agenda. It's not about partisanship. It's about restoring balance and serving all Oregonians.
Yeah, we have to go to break now, but I just want to ask you this question before we go. Do you see yourself becoming Governor Veto?
Oh, I, in fact, will use the veto if it's a bad policy. The veto will not be used for partisan purposes, but the veto will be used to serve Oregonians. It's an important check and balance on our system, and it's been underutilized in single-party control.
More of our conversation with candidate for governor Christine Drazan right after the break. Welcome back to Eye on Northwest Politics and our conversation with Republican candidate for governor Christine Drazan. Let's talk gun violence and crime now. Major concern for Oregonians. In Portland, we're again on a record pace for gun violence this year, gun-related homicides. What would you do as governor in that regard when it comes to crime and gun violence?
Yeah, I actually believe that the actions that Ted Wheeler has recently taken to reinstitute their violence intervention efforts in communities that they know were more prone to gun violence is important. And I will do everything that I can to support local communities and local response to that. I think that when we saw fewer and fewer and fewer law enforcement officers on the streets, that our streets did become less safe. And I think reestablishing those relationships and communities across Portland are critical to ensuring that those numbers go down. We have got to have more officers present and on the street. As I understand it, Portland has about 200 officers short of what they actually need right now. And you can see it across the city. You can certainly see it across the region.
Yes, so do you believe in more police funding?
Yeah, I absolutely do. We need to ensure that we are incentivizing folks to come to Oregon and come to Portland. I mean, we had a couple of years where the reputation for this community as far as support for law enforcement really went into deep decline. And so we need to remind folks that are in that profession that they're wanted in this region. We need them here. They will keep our communities more safe. And certainly we have the opportunity to establish those on-the-ground relationships in communities across Portland to ensure that it is community law enforcement, it is community-based policing.
Another ballot measure that Oregonians will be voting on November 8th, Measure 114. That would require a permit from law enforcement to purchase a firearm. It would expand background checks and put a limit on magazine rounds. What do you think of that?
Yeah, Oregon has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the nation currently. And there is no data out there that says that if you, in fact, require a permit or training, that you're going to reduce suicide rates, that it's going to stem the tide of suicides among veterans or youth or anyone else. So the approach in this particular ballot measure is not science or evidence-based. And what it actually will not do is affect the challenges that it's trying to affect. I mean, if there was a piece of legislation out there that would stop criminal activity, I'd be all about it. But gun violence is already a crime. Every bit of that is already criminal activity. So what we need to do is have more law enforcement to enforce our existing laws, ensure that we continue to maintain high standards for background checks, and recognize that what we need to do is enforce the laws that are on our books right now.
Abortion, a hot button national issue, even though abortion is legal in Oregon. This question is from reviewer Joan in Happy Valley. And it says, do you support a woman's right to choose and keeping legislatures out of doctors' offices?
Yeah, well, in Oregon, the legislature is in the doctor's office. I mean, we have statutory language that says you have full access to abortion up to birth in the state of Oregon. So no matter how we look at this, it's going to be legislated, I suppose, is the short answer to that question. In Oregon, they did, in fact, put everything related to access to abortion in Oregon's laws. I think it was in 2017. And so a woman's right to an abortion in the state of Oregon is not called into question. It's already settled statute in our state. I have never shied away from my pro-life values. It's faith-based for me. And also, I'll uphold the law. It's my job as governor to uphold Oregon's laws, and that will not change. That will not change based on my pro-life values.
Okay, so you're not in favor of changing any of Oregon's abortion laws?
Well, to be clear, it would take a legislative action to do so. So we were talking earlier about how unlikely it is that we will have a different makeup in the legislature. The numbers might tighten in the Senate, but we are not going to see a pro-life legislature in the state of Oregon. That's what it would take to change any statutes on Oregon's books today. So there will not be legislation that will come to my desk on that issue. It won't happen in the state of Oregon. I have been clear that if legislators advance something to me where you're using public funds to pay for abortions for people coming in from out of state, I will veto that. I do not believe that that's the appropriate use of public funds to invite people in from other places and to pay for their abortions within the state of Oregon. And so I would veto that if that was a line item in a budget. Other than that, as far as access, it's all built into Oregon statute right now.
Nike founder Phil Knight gave Betsy Johnson more than $3.75 million, and then the polls started moving in your favor. Phil Knight gave you $1 million and then made another $1 million donation to a Republican PAC. What does that say to you?
Well, it says that Phil Knight wants a new direction for the state of Oregon. Like so many other Oregonians, it means that he believes that this is the year for change and that there's a very real opportunity to elect a governor that would restore balance in our state. So I am thrilled to have the support of Phil Knight. Certainly I'm thrilled to have the support of Oregonians across our state. You know, whether it's a $5 contribution online or whether or not it's a larger contribution from someone like Phil Knight. All of it allows me to share my message with Oregon voters. And my message is that I believe in Oregon's future. I believe that we have a bright future, but that we really do need change.
You grew up in Klamath Falls, live in Canby now, both rural communities. We have about a minute left. How would you assess the urban-rural divide in Oregon, and how would you navigate it as governor?
Yeah, under Tina Kotek in particular, as Speaker of the House, she took Portland ideas, things that work perfectly well in an urban setting and applied them statewide in a way that harmed and disenfranchised people outside of Portland. And I will ensure that the voices of all Oregonians are heard and respected, that we have more local control, and that they have opportunity. So my two issues as it relates to bridging our urban-rural divide, which is very real, is you need opportunity across the state, not just in Portland, not just on the I-5 corridor, but every corner of our state deserves to have the opportunity to support their families. And they also need the respect to recognize their lives are different than those in an urban setting. And as Oregon's next governor, I will do that.
Christine Drazan, thank you for joining me on Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. If you missed any of our interviews with all three Oregon gubernatorial candidates, you can still watch them. My conversations with Democrat candidate Tina Kotek, unaffiliated candidate Betsy Johnson, and Republican candidate Christine Drazan are all on our website. That's coin.com/NWPolitics. Two candidates up for Portland City Commissioner will square off next week here on KOIN 6. Incumbent Joanne Hardesty and business owner Renee Gonzalez will debate the city's biggest issues. You can catch that live on Thursday, October 27th, starting at 7 p.m. on KOIN 6. Thank you for joining us on Eye on Northwest Politics. We'll see you right back here this same time next week.